context of brain spotting knows and makes use of the fact that given the right circumstances, the human nervous system knows how to reboot itself. Okay. And it's central to brain spotting and to what we call the frame of brain spotting, which is the reason the client comes to see the therapist and the way that the therapist receives the client and the way that they hold the client's frame together in such a way that it promotes the nervous system in its capacity to reboot. So um, quickly, I didn't discover brain spotting. I noticed it. Okay, the reason I say that is because everything that I noticed in brain spotting was out there in the natural environment, and it has been, and for hundreds of years and thousands of years. So I don't take the credit for discovering something that was out there for all therapists and healers and all people to see. And the noticing happened in 2003. I was working with an ice skater that I had worked with for a year of 90-minute sessions. She came in because she had severe performance blocks, and she was very talented. She had the capacity to be a uh, a championship skater now on a national basis, but when she went to competitions that she should be placing first, second, or third in, she was usually coming in seventh, eighth, or ninth because of these performance blocks. She really responded very well to the work that we did. She was very dedicated. Uh, but after a year, she was still blocked on one jump, which is called a triple loop. Now, a triple loop is skater skates, jumps in the air, turns around once, twice, three times, and then completes it and skates on from there to the next jump. Uh, the skater was unable to complete the triple loop. She'd go into it, she'd turn once, twice, and instead of that third time, she would, as skaters call it, pop out of the jump and only do two revolutions. Now, why was that such a problem? The triple loop, which is not one of the hardest jumps, even though it's impossible for us to conceive doing, was compulsory for either the short program of 3 minutes or the long program of 5 minutes. And because she couldn't do it, that was the biggest block that was left to her, you know, being able to manifest what she was capable of. And I was using a combination at that point. I was had a lot of integrated modalities and having to do a lot with body awareness, but also very slow eye movements, where I was moving very slowly across the field of vision like this. And I went across, and then I came back, and right over here, her eye went into this intense wobble. And that wobble just, instead of me continuing to move my hand, it just felt like a hand grabbed my wrist and held it in place. And the skater looked at my fingers like it was a video screen and was just illustrating what she saw for the next 10 minutes. And literally traumas that we hadn't worked on, whether it was skating traumas, performance failures, injuries, other issues, as well as personal traumas from her family of origin, came up and processed through. And then another one came up and processed through. This went on for 5 minutes when a transition happened, and she started to have traumas that we had supposedly worked through before reopen and process to a deeper level. And then after that happened, another one we worked on came up, and this happened for another 5 minutes. So after 10 minutes, everything quieted down and her eye just relaxed and released. We finished up and she left the session. And uh, at that point, I had been in the field for um, 20 years. So it was something that I had never really seen before. And I was wondering what it was and whether it was something significant. Well, she called me the next morning for the practice rank and she said, David, I just did a triple loop, no problem at all. And I did it again and again and again. And she never had a problem with that. At that point, I have the feeling that this was some kind of breakthrough. But I wondered if this applied just to her or if this applied to other people or could apply to everybody. So I started with the clients who came in for all the sessions for the rest of that week and the next week to do the exact same thing. And every time I saw a reflex in the client's eyes, whether it was a hard blink, a double blink, a squint, or eyes wide open, anything like that, I stopped there. I didn't say anything, but I just observed how their processing went from there. And with virtually every person, the processing went deeper and deeper and deeper. It became more somatic, and things seemed to happen that just hadn't happened before. And I was working successfully with all these folks. But clients said to me, David, this feels deeper. A few clients even said, I feel it all the way in the back of my head. That's where the brainstem is, and the autonomic nervous system. And a lot of my clients at that point, even now, were therapists doing similar kind of work that I was doing. I didn't tell them what it was. I just did the whole thing. And afterwards, they say, okay, David, just tell me what's up. You did something different and it felt different. And I explained the story of the skater. And I didn't say go out and use it with your clients, but they went out. And of course, good therapists are always looking for better ways to heal people. And they tried it out and they came back. And over the next couple of weeks, I got all this feedback of what they were experiencing. And at that point, I knew this was a paradigm shift. I knew it was breakthrough technology. That was the beginning, 23 years ago, of brain spotting. So it started, brain spotting just started by looking for these reflexes in a client who brought in an issue and felt activated around the issue and had body awareness around the issue, wherever they were feeling activated in their body. So that was brain spotting. And what had started to happen as I was looking for these reflex spots is clients started to direct me. They said, David, you missed it. So what do you mean you missed it? And say, go back, go back, go back. It's right over there. I say, how do you know it's right over here? I just feel it. I know it, you know? So there was a felt sense intuitive aspect where clients were directing me. So this became the second way of finding relevant eye positions. And so I had to come up with a name for it. So the first one, where I was looking into the client's eyes, I called outside window because I was looking from the outside. And this second one, where the clients told me from the inside where the eye position was, I called inside window. That was a big change. But a third thing came about. I was working with a client, and he came in to talk to me about something he was very activated about from the previous week. And he starts telling me, and he leans forward, he lifts his head, and he looks, and he's staring at a spot, and he's talking to this spot instead of talking to me. So I noticed this again. I just said, well, there must be a reason he's looking over there. So I said, keep looking over there and notice what happens. And just like looking at these outside or inside window spots, he went into some very deep processing. And this was, I call this gaze spotting, GAZESPOTING, because it was the intuitive gaze of the client. So we now had three ways of finding relevant eye positions. And to this day, when we teach phase one training in brain spotting, we teach those three ways. Um, what's also interesting about brain spotting is that it's not a set model. It's always evolving, and from there, different pieces fall into place. So that brain spotting now in 2026 is not what brain spotting was in 2025 or 2024, let alone 2020 or 2015. So it's a model that's always evolving. Um, we see. Uh, so the question arises: what is it about the eyes that make it such a unique portal into the deep nervous system? And from this, I'm going to talk a little bit nervous system wise, which is, I mentioned before, the cardiac nervous system, which again has, uh, thousands and thousands of neurons and neuronal pathways. The eyes, it turns out the eyes are loaded with neurons and reflexes also. The retina and the optic nerve are, which is the foundation of how we see with the information that comes in into the eyes, the visual stream. Turns out the retina and the optic nerve are made up entirely of neurons. Okay. In addition to that, um, some of you may have heard of polyvagal theory from Stephen Porges, which is based on the 10th cranial nerve and how it goes right in, it goes right from the brain down the brain stem right into the body to the heart to the stomach, and has a great deal of effect on how we are regulated or dysregulated. Turns out that there are 12 cranial nerves. The second cranial nerve is the pathway from the retina to the optic nerve that again goes right into the brainstem and right into the body. You know, so that's a direct pathway in. Also, uh, the the eye muscles that hold the eyes in place. There's six eye muscles for each eyeball are loaded with reflexes and nerve endings. Okay, and there are actually three cranial nerves that come directly out of the eye muscles. That again, it's it's the third cranial nerve, the fourth cranial nerve, and the sixth cranial nerve go right directly into the body and right into the nervous system. Um, the In addition, so I call this it is called, and I call this the ocular nervous system. So we have the cardiac nervous system, the ocular nervous system. Uh, there are six other subdivisions of the nervous system in the body. We have the autonomic nervous system, which is the brain, the brainstem, the central nervous system, which extends down the spine, the peripheral nervous system, which goes right out from the spine to every part of the body, finishing with the nerve endings in our fingertips and hands and our feet and our skin. The there is the digestive system, turns out, has 1 billion neurons. It's called the enteric nervous system. And again, the neurons in all the nervous systems, including in the gut, are made up of the same things as brain cells, and they communicate with each other through the nerve endings and the synapses where information is transmitted. Um, and there's also, well, there's two more parts of the nervous system, which is the sensory nervous system and the motor nervous system. All of this, all of this are ways that information is experienced and held. And also when we experience trauma, it's not just in the brain, not just in the brain stem. It's throughout the entire nervous system, the distribution of neurons throughout the body. So the theory that we have is that where you look affects how you feel. So that if a person is upset about something, and even more so if they have an awareness of where they're feeling the upset in their body, if they look off to one side, look off to the right, or look all the way off to the left, things feel different. It may feel worse over here and not as bad over here. Even in the middle can feel different. Like I say, where you look affects how you feel. So with the inside window brain spotting, if a client comes in and they had a very bad fight with a family member, and they were very upset, and they have a long history. They grew up in a very chaotic family, um, and they come in and they say, "This is what's happened, and this is how I'm feeling." Literally, you'll ask them, "Where do you feel it in your body?" My chest is tight. Where do you feel it the most? Looking to your right, to the middle, or to the left? And literally, the client will guide you, and you'll find that exact spot, which we call a brain spot. The question popped up before, why is it called brain spotting? Well, like anything else, I had to give it a name. And after my noticing and beginning to develop this model, and even moving towards the training, I was thinking of all kinds of different things. And somehow the fact that it's a spot in the brain which correlates to a spot in the field of vision came to me. So from that, I called it brain spotting. Um, so uh, uh, Now I'm going to give a couple of more conceptual things. Um, the nervous system, the human nervous system, has between 1 to 4 quadrillion synaptic connections. That's synapse, the synapses are what connect the brain cells together. Quite a quadrillion is a billion multiplied by a million. That's how many synaptic connections there are, which is more than the known stars in the universe. Okay. And because of this, in brain spotting, we call this leads us to what we call the uncertainty principle. What this means is when a therapist sits down in front of another person, the person who comes to them for help, the therapist is sitting in front of a system that is so infinitely deep and complex that it is essentially unknowable. You can't know 1 to 4 quadrillion synaptic connections from the outside. You can't really know where the person is coming from. You can't know where they're at, and you can't know where they're going. So we say that the therapist is in a state of uncertainty. This makes brain spotting different from virtually every other model that doesn't have this concept, that has this idea that this is what you do and this is when you do it and this is how you do it. Even if it's done in a very empathic, attuned way, there still are prescriptions for it that we say in brain spotting have elements of certainty to it. We say in brain spotting, you cannot bring certainty into the field of uncertainty. Okay, that's like believing that you can know things that you can't possibly know. So, in this context of uncertainty, what do you do? What does a therapist do? Well, we say in the face of uncertainty, all we have is the frame. Now, I referenced the frame before, but I'm going to just talk about it a little bit again. The client comes in for their first session for a specific reason. There are certain things that basically that they have suffered with and struggled with. They've tried to work it out on their own and they haven't been able to work it out on their own. And they're either they suffer so much or they're inhibited so much that it really affects their lives. And they come to that decision, I need help. And then from there, it's not so easy to then get help to find a therapist or to find the right therapist. So by the time the client comes in for that first session, they're coming in with the frame of their experience, which is, is what brings them there and what's inside of that. So we say that the brain spotting therapist mindfully receives and holds that frame with the client. Okay, now remember, in uncertainty, we don't know what that frame is, but we know it is. We can say in brain spotting, you don't have to know what it is to know that it is. And in that context, because of this mutually held frame, this goes back to the nervous system reboot. The nervous system, it, goes into different configurations, and it goes into configurations that it wouldn't have without this mutually held frame. And what happens as a result is processing, which in brain spotting we call focused mindfulness processing. You the client is on an eye position, they're aware of where they feel the activation in their body, and we say to them, this is the mindfulness piece. Just notice what comes up, notice what comes next, what comes after that, and follow it wherever it goes. Follow the processing wherever it goes. Be curious about it, trust it, don't judge it. Okay. And from there, and
Your lived experience
excuse me, somebody said about lived experience.
and the task today is to be with it.
Yeah, yeah. But it's to trust it and to follow it wherever it goes. But it's a our lived experience is just how we experience ourselves on the inside and on the outside, and the interplay between the two. But this processing is again, it's very focused, because as a result of this mutually held healing frame. And there's something that goes on. That processing is actually the nervous system rebooting itself, you know. But if you judge it, if you try to direct it, it gets in the way because the nervous system knows what to do. Now I've been talking for a while, so I'm um, if you can, Suzanne, just help me with either if any people have raised their hands or if there's anything on the chat.
We do have some questions in the chat. Okay, so from Pam Maccabee, exactly what happens when the process is occurring?
Well, I'm going to contextualize it in terms of trauma. Okay, and trauma is developmental. It's not like you just have one trauma when you're in your 20s or your 50s, whatever it is. You know, our traumas start very early in our development. And what trauma is unprocessed, unmetabolized experience that's held in the nervous system. And again, as I said before, it's not just the brain or the brainstem. It could be in the spine or the spinal neurons or the enteric neurons or the cardiac neurons. Um, and uh, Brain spotting is a developmental model and it's a trauma-based model. So we look at whatever the person is experiencing in a developmental context. But the idea, when we say unprocessed trauma, the nervous system, in its complexity and its brilliance, knows how to process everything that we experience on the inside and the outside. But if something happens that's so overwhelming, the nervous system is not able to process it through, and it is left unprocessed throughout the nervous system. Okay. The whole thing about the eye positions is that it is designed to help the nervous system to find the unprocessed trauma wherever it's held in the nervous system. And the client keeps on gazing at that point. Okay, we use a pointer actually because it's hard to hold your hand up for that long. So the eye position helps the nervous system to locate the unprocessed trauma. It's held in place, and then the processing that ensues from that is the nervous system processing in the present what it wasn't able to process through, whether it was 5 years ago or 20 years ago or 50 years ago. Okay. Now, Suzanne, I'm not sure if that fully answered the question. I want to make sure that it does.
Pam, do you have a follow-up?
So many profound things happen during therapy. I want to get in touch with you because I want to be able to refer people to what you do. That is perfect from my experience. But I'm so curious. No one ever says aloud how much crying, which I feel is full embodiment, no one ever says if when they use mindfulness with a therapist who can accept emotions no matter how intense they are, does crying ever occur when your people are metabolizing or processing the trauma? That's what I'm trying to understand. And I thank you. But what you're doing, it is perfect from my own viewpoint.
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, for you or Pam or anybody wants to reach me or get more information, the website for brain spotting is simply brainspotting.com. Okay. As far as crying goes, people will have all kinds of different emotional reactions while they're processing, and crying is very high on that list. One of my sayings is that tears are medicine. Okay. So that and tears are very much part of the grieving process. And grieving is one of the ways that we heal and come out of trauma. Um, but what's interesting is that there's some people who um, are very emotional, whether it's grief that comes up, or anger that comes up, or fear or anxiety that comes up. And there's some people who, on the outside, are more stoic during processing. But just because a person appears like they're not really being that emotional, okay, doesn't mean that they're not. It can be going on completely on the inside. And so if you assume just by looking that there's a lot of emotional activation or there's little or none, this is, again, that's the uncertainty. You have to listen to the person, follow the person, ask the person. Um, uh, Questions have come up a number of times, the differences between brain spotting and EMDR. Okay. Um, EMDR is a very effective technique. It goes back, started by Francine Shapiro in the late 1980s. But and it's a processing therapy also, and it relates to brain activity also. I'll say these are the two main differences. First of all, EMDR is based on eye movement, and as Francine Shapiro taught it, and most of the trainers do, the eye movements are pretty fast. Okay, brain spotting uses the visual, the visual processes, but instead of the movement that happens, it's the specific location. And or brain spot, once you find that relevant eye position, that specific location, it's the fixation on that spot. So instead of it being the movement, it's just looking at it's the lack of movement, but with relevance to it. So the power of EMDR is comes out of the bilateral stimulation, whether it's visual or otherwise. Brain spotting, it's the attunement to the nervous system, not trying to get the nervous system moving, but by trying to really get that spot so you can get the direct access deeper down. Um, Another thing is that EMDR is based on protocols and procedures. There's a specific protocol that is set up. Um, you notice, and it's used the same way with each client. Okay, from step one to step two to step, etc. You notice they use the term frame in brain spotting. Frame is is different, in some ways opposite, because there's no steps to receiving a client, mindfully receiving who they are, where they're coming from, what they're carrying, and to see that as their frame, and then to receive that frame and hold that frame with them. Okay. So we don't have protocols. Okay. We feel that protocols actually get in the way of attunement. Um, but the last thing is, and I haven't mentioned this, talked about attunement. In brain spotting, we talk about dual attunement, two different kinds of attunement happening simultaneously. Okay. Now so far I've covered the attunement to the nervous system and the visual systems and all of this. But brain spotting is based on the attuned presence of the therapist engaging the client in a relationship. Brain spotting is at its foundation a relational therapy. And it's not a mistake that it's developed that way, because I didn't come into this as a brain scientist. I came into this as a therapist, as a clinician. So now it's not saying that people who do EMDR don't use the relationship, but it is saying that the relationship is not built into the model of EMDR. It's sort of assumed. And brain spotting, it isn't assumed. It is presumed. Okay. So that instead of all this, the brain aspect and the technical aspect, moving the therapist away in the process from the relationship. Okay. What it's done, it's the dual attunement. You take that attuned relational presence of the therapist, and it is focused in a way that it can't be on its own by the attunement to the visual system and the somatic system of the client. It's the two together, that dual attunement. And it's contextualized in brain spotting as the dual attunement frame. That concept is not a part. And let me just say one more thing. The uncertainty principle, which is another foundation of brain spotting, doesn't exist in EMDR. It can be used that way, but it's just not part of the theory or practice of EMDR.
We have a question that is related to what you're talking about with this relational attunement, but a number of people are wondering, is brain spotting something someone can do themselves? Does it have to be in the framework or the frame of a attuned professional? And if so, how and where do we find people who are qualified to lead brain spotting?
Okay. Well, again, the website, brainspotting.com, we have, thousands and thousands of people all around, not just the country, but all around the world. Brain spotting is an international phenomenon. We have trainers and therapists in Europe, Asia, South America, Africa. Um, but what was the other part of the question?
Can it be done ourselves? Can,
Oh, yeah,
can
yeah,
someone
yeah.
do it themselves?
Okay. That's like saying, can you do therapy on yourself? Well, mindfulness, contemplation, meditation is a way of on your own trying to be in a process. So you can't have a dual attunement. You can't have dual attunement. You can't have a frame with yourself. However, um, there are two simple ways of using brain spotting on its own, and it ends up becoming a mindful process. If you notice that you're looking at a certain spot and you've been looking at that spot for the last 10 seconds or 30 seconds or minute, there's something there. Keep looking at it. Just notice what's going on inside, you know, and then observe your processing internally. Now, the other way that's a little bit more technical is using what I called inside window, which is if you want to work on something, you just notice how you're feeling, where you're feeling it in your body, and then you notice where you feel the presence of it the most, whether it's more looking off to your left, looking straight ahead, or looking to your right. And you say, well, how do I know? I say, you'll know. It's intuitive. When it's there, and it sometimes it feels like your eyes almost want to move there. And that's those eye muscles that just have that intuitive knowledge. So it may just happen on its own. Or you'll say, you'll notice that over here, it's kind of vague. Over here, it's getting clearer. Over here, you feel it a lot more directly. So that's the way that you can identify and do that processing on your own. And you could do it for a minute, or you could do it for 10 minutes, or if you're really someone who probably does mindfulness work, a meditator, you can do it for a half an hour. You know, it's and it's effective. It's not going to it's not the same as working with a brain spotting therapist. And like I said, they're all over the country and all over the world. So, and our website is the place of access, or even if you ask on the information there, we can offer a referral. But we're just tapping into the natural processes that are there. In brain spotting, everything we do has to make sense and at the same time be organic. It can't be just from protocol or procedure. It can't be because, it's in a book. It has to be because it's with the person right in front of you, how they show up and how you receive them, and how you sit with them and hold the space with them.
We have a somewhat related question that I think you covered in part, and maybe this question will take it a little deeper from Sandy Smith.
Mhm.
Will you talk about clients choosing to close their eyes during brain spotting? So starting off with a brain spot and eventually choosing to close their eyes. Do we have an understanding of what is going on in the brain when this happens? Have you experienced this?
Well, the uncertainty principle tells us that we don't know why the client is closing their eyes at that time. And that's really valuable wisdom. Instead of thinking or hypothesizing why are they closing their eyes, the worst hypothesis is to say they're avoiding dealing with things. And by the way, you say a difference between EMDR and brain spotting. If you're doing these eye movements and a client closes their eyes, you can't do the eye movements. But if the client is on a spot for 10 minutes and they just naturally close their eyes, you keep on holding your finger or the pointer up there. And that was the last thing they saw before they closed their eyes. And when they open their eyes, whether it's in 5 seconds or 5 minutes, that's the first thing that they're going to see. But but this is such a crucial part of brain spotting. And this goes to, trusting the nervous system. Whatever the client does, we don't assume anything about it. We don't project anything onto it. We don't judge anything about it. If a client closes their eyes, we assume that they're doing it for the right reasons. All that we do though is when they close their eyes, we know they're still processing. They're processing differently than if they were looking at the point. Okay, but it literally the brain will go into a different mode of processing, and then when they open their eyes again and they're looking back at that point, they're in a different place than they were when their eyes closed, experientially and and neurobiologically, and the processing will continue from there. So when it happens, we trust it because we always trust the client. We always know that the client intuitively knows how to heal, and we're helping their nervous system to do that on its own or to reboot itself.
Okay, we have a question from Lynn Close. So following the natural processing, this is the opposite of a meditation guidance to note a thought and then let it go. Is that correct?
Correct. You know why? Because in brains and my meditation and those meditations are been around for thousands of years, and they're very powerful and very effective. To notice a thought and then let it go. Let me go back to the neuro piece of this. We have the human thinking brain, known as the prefrontal cortex. We call it in brain spotting the neocortex. That's where thought is, language is, analysis, planning, action, all of these things. But everything below it, below the neocortex, is called the subcortex. That's where the limbic system is, or the mammalian brain. That's where the brainstem is, or the autonomic brain, going down into the upper spinal column. Okay, so change happens not from the top down. It happens from the bottom up. It happens from deep in the nervous system, deep into the body. Okay, and in brain spotting, we look to bypass the neocortex, because the neocortex does not have the capacity for regulation. We call it going from dysregulation to regulation. The capacity to do that is not held in the neocortex. It is all for higher order function. We're looking to the eye position, the body awareness, the processing, all attempts to bypass the neocortex, because the healing happens at a subcortical basis. So if you say, notice a thought, then let it go. Noticing a thought is kind of a gentle kind of process. But the idea of trying to let it go brings the neocortex into that mix. Okay. Now remember, the neocortex doesn't run the process. It's the last stop on the experiential train ride. It receives the information. So it is not that effective when it comes to the deep subcortical processing, which is where healing happens for humans, and it happens in a very focused way with brain spotting. So in brain spotting, we don't tell a person notice and let it go. You just say notice, then notice what comes next. Notice what it's all in the open, spontaneous, observing process.
We have several different questions that I'm going to kind of combine about the different areas that brain spotting can help with. What does it help with? Chronic illness, PTSD? Can it help with any issues in our lives, or are there more specific areas that it is most effective?
Mm-hmm. Well, we want to separate out things that are in the nervous system from things that are more in terms of body injury or body illness. So, and there's a lot of overlap in the nervous system between things that are developmental, things that are emotional or psychological, and things that are physical or physiological. Brain spotting is a developmental model. What is development in brain spotting? we see it going back all the way, not only to childhood, not only to early childhood, not only to infancy, we see it going all the way back to birth. We see development also going back to the intrauterine experience. And for those who want to take it further, we even believe it goes back to generational experience. Okay. So that we are where we have been, in the most deep experiential ways. But also, all human beings experience trauma. Okay. Some experience more, worse, more repeated, but trauma is part of the developmental experience. So in brain spotting, we see every trauma that a person has that may be part of PTSD, as you was in the question. We see every trauma as a re-traumatization going back to the original traumas, which might be intrauterine, okay, and could be even considered generational. There's a lot more attention given to that. So, um, uh, if a person has a pain condition, can brain spotting help with that? Uh, Perhaps. Okay. Now, there's some people who have brought pain or muscle tension for brain spotting who've gotten a tremendous amount of relief from it, remarkable relief. There's some people who've gotten less, some who've gotten none whatsoever. The more structural it is, the more it just needs the whatever kind of treatment for pain that there is. But uh, in terms of, well, what kind of, a person seeking out therapy, what is brain spotting good for with that? The reason I said it has to do with the development is that's part of everybody. We look at what is in the diagnostic uh, manual, the DSM-5. Okay, they have anxiety disorders, and by the way, we don't see this as a disorder. We see it as a manifestation of adaptation to repeated trauma from early in life. They have anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, um, panic disorder, OCD, phobias, et cetera, et cetera. Because all those conditions happen in a developmental way, brain spotting, can be helpful with them, and for some people particularly helpful. Some people even more quickly than some of the other therapy models. Um, but again, because brain spotting addresses the human nervous system, okay, whatever condition is held in the nervous system, that's what the client brings with them. That's that's the frame that they bring with them. It's the frame of their nervous system, or we say their neuro experience. And that's what we receive from the person. And there's a lot of different neurobiological ways of understanding anxiety and depression, as the response to threat. We talk about the human and the mammalian response to threat is either flight or fight. It's not fight or flight. Flight comes first, creating distance from the potential danger. You know, Flight systemically comes with anxiety. Anxiety is what alerts the mammal or the human that danger is present and it's encroaching. You know, so too much flight activation through trauma is going to generate anxiety. um, Fight, if you can't escape, you go into fight mode, which is all, hyper adrenalized. You know, Too much unresolved fight response is going to lead to issues with anger response. People who react with anger or disproportionate anger to all kinds of situations. The last part of that is freeze. That's when a mammal can't fight, it can't flee, and it can't fight. It just goes into this freeze mode. A lot of what is in depression and dissociation and the deep trauma response has to do with unresolved freeze response. So again, when you contextualize everything that way, you can see how brain spotting can hold a frame around all of that and bring healing for all of that. I'm not saying that brain spotting is the magic elixir that cures all that ails us, but it's a very powerful, comprehensive model.
We have another question about this. Can this method help if the patient doesn't even know what their exact problem is?
Okay, let me redefine knowing. We in Western thought, we believe that knowing is conscious, okay, and that is cognitive, and so on. If you go to other, to Eastern countries and cultures, or you go to indigenous cultures, for them, knowing is in the body. Knowing is in the spirit, you know. So, um, uh, again, it's kind of a Western idea that you have to know about it. Most people do not understand that what they're struggling or suffering with is developmental. Most people say it's because I hate my job, or because I don't like my body, or because of my family, whatever it is. But all of that is in a developmental context. So, and again, like I said, most of what we experience is subcortical. That's what I was talking about, the 8 different parts of the nervous system. You know, if you're holding something in your cardiac neurons, in your heart neurons, or in your enteric, in your gut neurons, you know, you feel it. But you don't have a conscious knowing of it, but you have an intuitive somatic knowing of it. So to circle back to the original question, um, a person absolutely doesn't have to know what it is in a conventional Western cognitive way, you know. But what we know one thing for sure, that the client walked into that first session and they sat down in the chair. That's the knowing, you know. Most people who really need therapy don't ever go for therapy. So those who actually do they're going through barriers that most people never make it past. So even if they sit down in the first session, they say, I don't know why I'm here. I'd say to and I just open up discussion, but if a person can't articulate it, they don't have to articulate it, If you say, think about whatever brings you here, and you go across and over here, I start going rapid fire blinking, and you stop there. And just say, notice what goes on inside. That's the beauty of brain spotting. You don't have to be able to articulate anything, because your nervous system is, through your ocular nervous system, is going to manifest it. When a person, I've had people walk out of a session and say, I have absolutely no idea what happened, but I know it really helped me. It's making an intuitive statement. That's absolutely fine. That's not a problem. We say in brain spotting, nothing is a problem unless you make it a problem.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one to two more questions. We have something a bit acute from Amy Thompson Ledbetter. I feel like I'm in freeze mode now. I've been so stressed and in survival mode for so long that now I just have no motivation or desire to do anything. I'm exhausted and defeated, so much brain fog and dullness. What can I do now to get some relief? We may have others in our audience who want to know, is there anything we could do more acutely right now when we're in these very depleted nervous system states?
Okay. That sounds like one of many iterations of the freeze response. Okay. It sounds like you're in a state of freeze, and it sounds like it's not freeze that just happened from something recent. It sounds like it's something systemic, something developmental. Um, the first thing to know is that there are reasons for it. There are neurobiological, we say neuroexperiential reasons for it. It is information about where you have been and what has gone on and what you're carrying. Um, and brain spotting is in the general category of somatic therapies, like other somatic therapies. The only thing is that as a somatic therapy, we get the direct access from the visual system into the nervous system. Um, uh, if you sat down with me or any brain spotting therapist and it's just said, okay, just tell me what's going on, tell me how you got there. And again, in uncertainty, I would have no sense of what it is. but I would have a total sense that if I listen, I'll find out what it is. And whatever the pathway, the story is, you know, your story or all these interwoven stories, they all inform why this is, you know. And just one more thought on this. We don't really tend to understand this. When we go into these states, whether it's a high arousal or very low arousal, our system is trying to do the best it can. It's trying to protect itself. And in this case, you know, so it seems like I don't like feeling this way. I hate feeling this way. It gets in my way. But it's a very primal way that your nervous system is trying to protect itself. So healing comes by helping the system understand what it's trying to protect itself, and then to come to the realization, not cognitive, but experiential, neural experiential, that it doesn't have to protect itself in this way anymore. It doesn't have to be in freeze mode because that imminent threat is no longer there. And your nervous system is reacting like that imminent threat is there, either by going into the flight response, the fight response, or the freeze response. I want to, and this gets a little bit more complicated, but it's important to know, and I want to share this with you. Um, uh, Even if you're in the freeze response, there's still aspects of the flight response and the fight response that are left unresolved while you're in that freeze response. So it's all, you know, intermingled together. But if your unspoken question is, can brain spotting help me? I'd say yes, but I'd say particularly in the context that if you go to somebody who does brain spotting, who really receives you as you are and is present and empathic and in tuned to who you are and what you're carrying, and then from there uses the tools of brain spotting, your nervous system will go into a process. And sometimes it happens relatively quickly, sometimes it takes more time, but your nervous system will go into its own process. And it will be completely different than anybody else's process, even with the same symptoms.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Thank you to our audience members for sharing your questions. This has been so insightful, and I hope that you all benefited from this session with Dr. David Grant. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., I hope you will join us for a live meditation session with our founder, Dr. Fleet Mall. Neurosomatic mindfulness session is at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That will be recorded and available for replay for 24 hours if you have free access. And if you have lifetime access, of course, it will be available to you in perpetuity. We also have our next interactive expert-led Q&A tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. That will be with N. Kim in Defo. She is a nurse, midwife, and founder of the Resilience Toolkit. And you can also please be sure to catch Dr. David Grant's talk. It's airing tomorrow on January 21st. Tomorrow is all about optimizing the nervous system. Thank you so much once again for being here, and I hope you enjoy the nervous system reboot.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank all of you for coming.
Thank you. Goodbye.